It was supposed to be a normal evening, just like any other. I was on my way home from work, driving down an empty road under the heavy weight of a relentless downpour. But then something happened that made my heart freeze, something that would haunt me forever. I drove past the old cemetery, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing alone in the middle of the graveyard, drenched by the storm. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the rain. This figure was real, but as I blinked and looked back, there was nothing there. I should have driven away, but my curiosity, my need to understand, drove me to stop. Let me start by saying this. I wasn't someone who believed in ghosts or spirits. I didn't even believe in the supernatural. I was the type who laughed off stories about haunted houses and creepy encounters. That's what made what happened that night so terrifying. My name is Ryan. I had just moved to this sleepy town a few weeks earlier. I had taken a job at a local tech firm, and although the place was quiet, I'd settled in quickly. The town had an old-world charm, but it was starting to feel a little too eerie. That night, I had just finished a late shift at the office. The rain had started up just after sunset, and by the time I left work, the streets were slick and empty. The drive home wasn't far, just a few miles. But there was one stretch of road that ran next to the old cemetery. I had noticed it when I first moved here, a place most locals seem to avoid. I've never been fond of graveyards. There's something unsettling about them, but that night, something was different. As I passed the cemetery, I caught a glimpse of something through the iron gates. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light or if my mind was playing games with me, but there, under the heavy rainfall, I saw a figure standing motionless in the center of the graveyard. I shook my head and drove on, trying to dismiss it. It was just a trick of the light, I thought. But then I saw it again. This time, it was clear. It was a person, a man, drenched to the bone, his clothes hanging from him like rags, his face pale and gaunt. There was something wrong about him. His posture was too stiff, his movements too slow, as if he wasn't quite alive. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was no longer thinking about how silly this was. The figure in the graveyard wasn't just strange, it was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but my gut told me to stop. So, against every ounce of rationality, I pulled my car over to the side of the road. I glanced at my phone. It was 11:42 p.m., and the rain wasn't letting up. My headlights illuminated the iron gates of the cemetery, but the figure was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I turned the car off and sat there, staring at the cemetery, waiting for something, anything to happen. The world outside seemed impossibly still. The trees surrounding the graveyard swayed slightly in the wind, their branches creaking like old bones. The only sound was the relentless tap of the rain against my car roof. I sat there for what felt like forever. My mind raced, questioning whether I'd imagined the figure or if it had actually been there. But that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Something was wrong. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Why did you stop?" My pulse shot up. I looked around the car. I was completely alone. The road was empty, and the cemetery gates were closed, their rusty hinges silent. No one had been near me. I checked the message again. "Why did you stop?" I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. My fingers hesitated over the keys. I didn't know what to reply. Whoever was sending me these messages, whoever was watching me, was not someone I wanted to confront. I started the car, the engine sputtering for a moment before it roared to life. I was about to drive away when my headlights flickered, and I saw him again. There he was, standing just inside the gates of the cemetery, his face now visible. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me. His expression was devoid of life. It was the look of someone who had been dead for years. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest, and the text came again, this time more insistent. "I'm waiting for you." Before I could even process what was happening, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped toward the road. I felt the urge to drive off, to get away as fast as I could, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed by a strange mix of fear and curiosity. And then it happened. The thing stepped off the curb and onto the road. It moved closer to my car, its pace almost deliberate. I could see the water streaming off its tattered clothes, its skin like pale wax, its fingers twitching as if reaching for something I couldn't see. I couldn't look away. I couldn't breathe. He stopped at the side of my car, inches from the window. I could see him now, clearly. He wasn't just soaking wet, he was rotting. The flesh on his face had been peeled back, exposing raw, yellowed bone. His lips were cracked, revealing teeth that were sharp and jagged like those of an animal. And yet, he smiled. A slow, horrific smile. The world seemed to go quiet, like everything was holding its breath. My phone buzzed again. "Are you ready?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too terrified to move, to speak, to even scream. My body was frozen in place. The figure raised one hand and slowly, deliberately, pressed it against my car window. I could hear the wet slapping sound as his fingers left behind streaks of dark, greasy fluid. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, he disappeared. One moment he was there, inches from my face, and the next, he was gone. I blinked and looked around frantically. There was no sign of him anywhere. The road was empty. The cemetery gates were locked, but I wasn't alone. I reached for my phone, trembling. Another text. "Come find me, Ryan." My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I had to know what was going on. I had to face this thing, whatever it was. I parked the car on the side of the road and got out. The rain pummeled me as I approached the cemetery gates, the sound of my footsteps swallowed up by the storm. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but I couldn't turn back now. The gates creaked open as I pushed them, and I stepped into the cemetery, the darkness swallowing me whole. The tombstones loomed like silent witnesses to something far older than me. There was an eerie calm in the air, as if the world had stopped turning just for me. Then I saw something. A figure standing in the distance just beyond a row of weathered gravestones. His face was turned away from me. His shoulders slumped. His body stooped in a way that didn't look natural. I approached slowly, my heart pounding. I called out, my voice trembling. "Who are you?" The figure turned, and I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't the same man as before. This one had no face, just nothing. A hollow, dark void where his features should have been. And then it whispered, "Come closer, Ryan." I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't stay. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But as I turned to flee, something grabbed my wrist. It was cold, icy, and it burned. I looked down. His hand was on me. There was nothing in his grip but empty space, but it felt like the hand of death itself, pulling me toward the darkness. I fought. I screamed, but it wouldn't let go. And then, blackness. I woke up hours later, drenched, shivering on the side of the road. My car was gone. The cemetery was gone. It was just me and the empty night. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember how I got home, but I can tell you this: something followed me that night. I can still feel it, and it's waiting for me. If you enjoyed this terrifying encounter, Check out my other chilling stories for more encounters with the unknown. You won't want to miss what's next. Click the link and let the darkness consume you.